Welcome to this Insights interview from the Payments Association. Today I'm joined by someone whose career spans being CEO, chair, advisor, and NED of trading platforms, government advisory boards, clearinghouses, fintech companies, lobbying, and trade associations. So she'll agree, I think, that the timing of this interview is perfect. It's just after she received the Order of the British Empire from the Princess Royal at Windsor Castle, and my word, I did love that hat. And a week after the publication of the consultation response by the UK's Competition and Markets Authority on open banking. So please welcome the chair and trustee of open banking, Charlotte Crosswell.
Oh, thank you, Tony. And what a kind introduction. You make it sound so impressive. It doesn't feel like that along the way.
Well, I'm sure, but I think we'll discover some things about your secrets to your success as we go through this discussion. And as I think I've mentioned at the start of every Insights interview, I ask my VIP guest how they stay motivated. You know, what keeps them going the extra mile, the extra kilometre when faced with balancing challenging jobs and home lives that involve considerable calls on time and energy. I must remember the last time we met over a cup of coffee, for example, you were challenged by the fact that morning you'd been struggling to find your elusive cat and calm your upset teenage daughter, which was very funny. So what is it that continues to motivate you, Charlotte, day in, day out?
I mean, it's incredible, isn't it? I always feel so fortunate, and I tell everyone never say you're lucky. So I'm falling down at the first hurdle. But to be in a position where you hopefully in your little world you get to make a difference, and I think that's what's always motivated me. Doesn't matter whether I was doing my part-time jobs when I was a teenager to earn some pocket money, through the early stages of my career as I came into the city. But I loved looking back on things and saying, I can actually remember the things that I did to make a difference. And they may not have lasted very long, or they may have lasted a really long time. I did one piece of work at London Stock Exchange. I don't think they changed for 20 years. So that's what's always motivated me. And I think that's why I went into fintech, because you get the chance to change financial services for the better for consumers and small businesses. And that's going to make an impact on a lot of people's lives. And, I'm incredibly admiring of fintech founders who've gone on to pursue that because they've done it with a purpose and a mission in life. And that's what I feel like. And that's why I love the work I do now and previous roles, is I've had that chance to do the same, just in my own way, hopefully.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's really inspirational too. And it's quite interesting. I was watching there was a Twitter comment this morning about somebody who'd found that their fintech hadn't worked, and they were just putting hands up and saying, "Thank you, everybody, for trying. But we learnt, and we'll get up and we'll fight another day." And that's part of what with this wonderful industry we're in, isn't it?
It is, and you're right. I was at UK FinTech Week and the IFGS Summit, and I saw a founder I hadn't seen for the whole of the pandemic, and it hadn't worked. And someone I was really impressed by a few years ago when I met them, and and I won't go into details of why it didn't work. And I said, well done on you. You've embraced failure. That's great, because that's what they're teaching the kids in school now. Yeah. And that's what the West Coast is always. It's always a badge of honor. When you failed twice, you're more likely to be successful the third time. Yeah. And we don't do that enough. I think it's the British reservedness here. But I think it's fantastic when people sit there, learn from those mistakes, but even more importantly, come back up the next day and go, okay, that didn't work. What am I going to learn? Yeah. And I'm going to be resilient enough to try it again. And I had a lovely conversation with this founder, and he knows who I'm talking about. And great that probably coming back with a better proposition, a better model, and no doubt be more successful the next time.
Yes, and I think it was quite interesting looking back at your career, and I'd like you to do that now a little bit yourself, to look at what the lessons you learned as you went through the journey, because you've had quite a fascinating career in terms of it spanned Goldman Sachs, London Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. It spanned Citi UK, Innovate Finance and UK Finance. You've worked for government entities like DIT and CPS and now OBE. So what's been the core thread that's woven its way through all of these things and these institutions? And what did you find that made them so appealing?
So I applied for 2 graduate jobs when I was coming out of university. Well, I applied for a lot, but I got the one stage further on 2 of them. One was for the Foreign Office, and the other one was for NatWest Markets. And NatWest Markets turned me straight down. Clearly, my maths wasn't quite good enough, and that was a prerequisite at the time. Although they did finally come to me about 5 years ago and said, well,
Mhm.
how about looking at the board instead? So that was
Well,
quite
that's
funny.
nice.
And the Foreign Office, I got all the way to Whitehall. I don't think my university had ever had someone who'd got all the way to Whitehall for final interviews. And I didn't make it through.
Wow.
But I think it just shows you that mindset that I love this financial services thing that I didn't really know much about, because I grew up in a village of 500 people and not a bank in sight. But also I love the fact that the juxtaposition of how industry and government and overseas trade work together. So it's funny when you look back on that now, and what do? I get to work with banks, fintechs, innovators, regulators, government. So maybe I got them in the end, Tony, just a slightly strange route.
Yeah,
and maybe it was in my blood after all. Who knows?
yeah, fascinating, fascinating. And in a way, in your role, you have to engage with all these other entities, don't you?
Well, one of the reasons that I was excited to take on the Innovate Finance CEO job, which was originally a 6-month interim position, and I was going to find a new CEO, and became 4 years, is because post the Brexit vote, I noticed this huge divide between government and industry. Government weren't really engaging with industry, and industry weren't engaging with government because they didn't see the point of it. And you could see that we were at this really critical moment where financial services was about to innovate, but still incredibly important for the UK economy of what it does. And these tech companies that I dealt with a lot back in the late 90s were coming in to innovate this, but how are they going to get that through with regulation, trying to bang up against incumbents? How could you get investment when we weren't particularly well known for mid-stage, late-stage investments in the UK, good at the startup side? And I wanted to close that gap. And I really felt it was really important that we showed what the fintech sector was going to do for the UK economy, what it was going to do for UK jobs, but importantly, what it was going to do for consumers and businesses to give them a better financial services journey. And I think when you're talking to officials and ministers, we have to be better at explaining that. This isn't just about how much investment we can get into fintech, although that's continued to explode for the last 5 years. But what's the purpose of it, and what's it doing to help that small business, to help that man on the street who didn't know there was a better option there, to help people with thin credit file? And that's the thing that I think was really important. And I think we've got that message now between government and industry, and it's much better partnership now to make that happen.
I agree with you. And I think it was really refreshing to see, and let's not forget that most parliamentarians are not financial services specialists. They're not necessarily fintech specialists. And certainly there's something like digital currencies is a new world for them. It's an uncertain world. It was brilliant to see Rishi Sunak, following John Glenn's leadership this week, announcing that we're going to become a digital asset, digital currency center of innovation, a hub. And it was terrific to see that.
Yeah, I mean, it was, because so many people have been saying for a long time, we've done so much in fintech, we really pushed the boundaries. I mean, you look at the role I'm doing now in open banking. No one knew what open banking was. It didn't exist as a term. Yeah. And now everywhere you go around the world, people talk about open banking. And that was started in the UK. And so many people have said for quite some time now, why are we not doing more on crypto? Why are we not taking the leadership there when we've done everything else around fintech? And it is hard, but it is a global phenomenon. And if we don't do it, somebody else will do it, and it will happen to the UK. Why not step up? And I think people were really excited to see that announcement.
I agree. I think it's brilliant. I hope it's not too late because other countries have got a bit of a headway. But I think if we do it and we do it right, and certainly the Payments Association is championing this hard, as you know, then I think there's a good chance we can continue to establish our leadership role again. But okay, so let's move back to open banking, which is still exciting. I read on the OBIE website that there are 337 regulated providers, 245 TPPs, 92 account providers, blimey, all seeking to capitalize on the future for open banking and in time open finance and ultimately maybe even open everything. So you're the chair and the trustee of the open banking implementation entity, as it is. What does that involve, Charlotte? What does that mean?
And and I demystify it for anyone who doesn't know what open banking implementation entity is, because I know when I first heard the phrase several years ago, what is that? And actually, our official company name is Open Banking Limited, so that's what we're under as Companies House, but we trade as OBIE, and that's because we're there. Obviously, we were there to implement the original standards to make open banking happen. So obviously, again, the UK went far beyond what Europe had done with PSD2 and actually made it happen and found this convening body that could be there to set those standards, consult with the industry, so that actually we could open this up to more providers. And this is why you have more open banking participants in the UK than the whole of Europe put together. Yeah. And Europe's still struggling to work out how they're going to manage that. So and it's a really great example, isn't it, of where you've got a directive. Just because you've got the directive, someone's got to go and make it happen. And incredibly insightful, really, that the UK did take that lead. Now, obviously, everyone knows the history that it was supposed to happen a lot quicker. And obviously, working with 9 banks and a huge amount of fintech providers who want everything to happen yesterday and can make everything happen yesterday wasn't easy. And you're trying to find standards that obviously everyone is going to sign up to. So it has taken a long time to get where we are today, but what a great foundation we now have. And yes, there's other markets who've come out, perhaps people would say with more vision beyond open banking ahead of us. But even when you talk to those markets, they're still coming into us and into the UK and saying, well, actually, how do you make it happen? Because you can go and make the grand statement, but actually, who's going to do the work?
Yes.
And who's going to leave that room and make that happen? And I think the work that's been done by industry, in partnership with the implementation entity, I think has been incredibly strong, and it's going to set us in a really great footing for what comes next.
I agree, and I want to talk about what comes next in a little bit. But you're not the only one there, are you? You sound so. It's not just about you. So your role typically is you've been recently establishing governance, a new team of people. Is that right?
Yes, so we have approximately 80 people, all permanent employees, and we have a few contractors here and there who come in for a couple of months, but it's a permanent employment basis. And obviously, there's been a lot of contractors in the past who've come through the OBIE. But what you now have is, as I said, 80 permanent staff who are divided across ecosystem growth, who are divided into the policy team, who are working at the standards team, the hub of what we're doing. We have the monitoring team, obviously, who monitor the CMA 9 performance and get but they rely on the rest of the organisation to bring that MI into that, so we can actually refer cases over to the CMA. So the monitoring function has been really crucial in getting that data out there. So it's fairly well-oiled, slick machine. And we have made some changes recently. So we brought in our first CEO just in February, Henk van Heur, who's been reorganising internally to look at the team that takes us through to transition. We've got a new HR and people director, so obviously taking that employment base and then developing them so we can sit them and adapt. Incredibly important. And just a couple of weeks ago, we hired a new general counsel as well. So very excited, because that's going to be a pretty busy job over the next few weeks and months. But obviously said, the core team is there and has been working incredibly hard, and personal thanks to all of them for how much work they've done over the last few months to get ready for announcements and get ready for now, as I said, what comes next, and analysing it and trying to make sure that we're engaging the whole of the industry so everyone has that voice, and we try to amplify the voices that maybe haven't got huge policy teams to do it for them, and maybe keep at bay the ones that are well staffed, shall we say.
Well, I think that's brilliant. And I think that just that last couple of minutes will demystify it a lot for many of the people out there who sort of see OBIE as a sort of a bit of a fortress, and now it's quite nice to hear that it's kind of filling out and, as you say, ready for the next stage. So in terms of the future opportunity for open banking, where would you see as the biggest opportunities? What's the biggest chance? You talked about making a difference earlier on. Where can we really make the most difference?
Well, so obviously, as I said, the benefits we've had of open banking in the UK is we've had this convening body to set those standards, and that has given us a strong foundation. I would say because people thought it was only going to take a couple of years, and maybe we were all naive thinking that open banking could be successful in 2 years to set those standards up. I think people have been champing at the bit to move forward and saying, well, how can we go beyond the original order, a competition remedy, to drive us forward. So I think that's been the slight challenge you have as trustee, that I'm there as trustee for the original retail market investigation order that came out from CMA. And that's the limitation of my role. Now, CMA 9, quite rightly, want to make sure that they're only paying for the entity, because obviously they have to fund it, to comply with that order. So that's been the slight challenge, I think, for everybody, is we all see the opportunity, including the CMA 9, of what can come next. But that's not under the implementation entity, because the implementation entity is there to implement what's in the order, and only that. So obviously, I think a lot of people have been really looking forward to the transition into a whatever, we won't call it a permanent entity, but whatever the future entity becomes, because not only is it going to set the foundation for open finance, but importantly, it's going to continue the evolution of open banking, and that's got to come first. Because there's lots of things we've discovered along the way, and anyone who sits around our steering group will attest to this, of things that I think everyone would agree are really important, but they don't fall under the roadmap that's been put in place for the order. And obviously, in an ideal world, this would have happened a little earlier, because the roadmap's coming towards an end this summer, and we haven't quite got the mechanism yet of what comes next. CMA can't do anything about that, because they're obviously the authority for the competition remedy.
Yes.
But we've only just had the announcement of the new oversight committee that will be co-chaired by FCA and PSR. So it's going to be a compressed timetable, that's for sure. I know for the regulators and government that they're all working at pace, as we say, and we did get the joint regulatory statement in conjunction with the CMA Consultation Response. That, I don't think that would have happened if the consultation response had come out last summer. So for those who are frustrated at the delays, I would say you now have a vision and a process and a team in place that is going to make that happen, and we are all going to have heads down, and we will make it we'll make it in time, hopefully.
Well, it's very nice. I mean, sometimes they say it takes 4 minutes to boil an egg, and without putting a pressure cooker on the egg, it just takes 4 minutes. And sometimes you've got to have patience, and the process has to transition, and that's where you are now. So let's move on to talk about the consultation response from the CMA. It's just come out. With lots of commentary on the news, and comments are in the corridors of power in payments. What do you think of the report or the consultation response?
One thing I would say to anyone listening is, if you haven't read it, don't be put off by the size of it. It's actually quite an easy read. I think it ended up at 57 pages at the end. Yeah. But actually, there's some really digestible pieces in there. That talks about, obviously this is about the protection of the order, because this was a CMA consultation response. Yeah. And how do we move to a governance model that protects that order? But to a certain extent, obviously you can't just protect an order by going backwards. You have to continue to advance. So I think that's important, that we've seen the consultation responses that came through from the industry, who wanted a different governance model compared to what they consulted with, and that governance model did get changed compared to the consultation. So actually what we're seeing is much more of an independent board going forward. Obviously we've been working on that anyway, so not that similar to where we are now. But importantly, the industry engagement will have to be looked at to go hand in hand with that. You can put an independent board in, as we all know, anyone who's sat on boards, but you do need to have industry expertise on that board. And importantly, in our world, you have to have really detailed industry engagement as well. And I think that's something that obviously we've offered to the Oversight Committee, is how can we help to convene those voices, as I said, make sure that we're amplifying the ones that perhaps haven't got the resources, but we still need to have their voice around the table. So the CMA consultation response obviously dealt with that piece of it, is how do we move to a governance mechanism in the future that's going to protect that order and continue to bring competition into retail banking. And then I think when you read that in isolation, a lot of people would have said, but what about open finance? What happens beyond the order? And that's why I said it was really great to see the what everyone calls the JRS, the Joint Regulatory Statement, coming out and talking about this new oversight committee, so the Joint Regulatory Oversight Committee.
Or as it's now already being called
JROC. Yeah, no,
which does sound pretty cool, actually. It does sound pretty cool.
It's very fintech. But and I think for everyone who's coming to us at the moment, and there's obviously increasingly loud voices saying, but you need to work on this. This is something that's hampering open banking, and I have to look at it saying, but it's not in the order. So as trustee, I can't make that happen. But we can have some pretty sensible conversations across the industry between the fintechs and the banks, and saying, well, is this something we need to work on? And can it wait for the future entity to be set up? Or is it something that obviously is going to have to be dealt with before? And I think that's what the industry is looking for, is what happens almost before we get to transition, is how do we keep up that fantastic momentum we've all seen this year, and making sure that we are dealing with some of the issues that people would love resolved.
Yeah, I mean, I'm confident, based on what I've read, that we are going to avoid the cliff edge, which we've all been worried about. The question is, how long before the new entity is set up? And it's quite a complex thing, isn't it? Because it's got various stakeholders, everybody's got a view, it's got scope challenge, it's got resourcing challenges. And one of the commentators I heard said to me that they weren't happy with the CMA's comment, albeit that the good news was it was endorsed by the PSR, the FCA, and the CMA in their joint statement. They weren't happy because they felt it had pushed, it kicked his phrase was, the tough questions have been kicked down the road.
And I've heard that phrase probably from more than one, so I can't even identify who it is. Yeah, and as I said, you have to, anyone who's worked around regulators in government, you will know that obviously you have to look at what is there rather than what isn't there. We said we could have been facing a consultation response last year, which was just going to talk about future governance of the order, to protect the order. And I think that was concerning people. And how many people said to me, what about what comes next? What about open finance? So what you have now is, yes, we don't have the scope of the future entity set up yet. We have a approximate timing. Obviously, it's end of 2022 that people are talking about. We move transition, and obviously that includes the functions of OBIE and the work we're doing now into the new entity. But what it does say is there is going to be a new entity. That is going to be the oversight committee is going to be co-chaired by the two most important regulators, but CMA is still there as a member because obviously they've got a vested interest to protect it. And importantly, Treasury is also there as well.
Yes.
And it mentions open finance in there as well. So actually, maybe I'm a glass half full person. That in itself shows that we have the shape of what's to come next.
Good.
What we all have to now look at is obviously where that void of information is how do we bring that into a cohesive industry response to that? And I think industry has a huge role to play here to drive that forward. Now, for us, as I said, we've got one priority, which is to complete the roadmap, and most of the team, obviously back at OBIE Towers, are focusing on that.
Yes.
But I think we do have a role to play to look across industry and say, right, how do we find that balance, and how do we look at this quite strategic new entity now that's being set up to take forward existing open banking evolution? What comes next in open banking? What comes next in open finance? And we all know, obviously, what open finance can then unlock the door for. So for that person kicking the can down the road, let's make sure that while the can's being kicked down the road, that we nudge it in the right direction.
No, I would agree. And one of the most interesting areas, and I had a chat with Gavin Littlejohn of F Data this week, and we were just talking about this. And there's some views that he's probably very positively supportive of it, and as I think the Payment Association is. I think one of the hardest things is it's all about the money in it. It's the funding, and who's going to pay for what? Who's going to pay for this? And ultimately, how does a commercial model of this new entity actually work? And I would love to know what your thoughts are on the CMA can't fund everything. Sorry, the CMA 9 can't fund everything in future. Who is going to do the funding?
Well, and I think and that's why I'm actually very happy to see this new oversight committee, JROC, being set up, because at one point I think people were saying, is industry going to have to resolve that between itself and put forward solutions? Well, that's going to be tough, because I don't think we're going to get to an agreement where there's a meeting in the middle on that. Obviously, CMA 9 still have to fund the protection of the original order, and that's something that everyone's aware of. Now we've got to work out obviously where the split of funding of that costs plus what comes next. But with having the oversight committee in place, we've actually almost got those independent people there to say, right, let's engage with industry. What would be a good solution? How does this get funded? What does that look like? You talked about commercial opportunities. You obviously got the monitoring function, which we need to make sure is really segregated and is safe, so that that's doing the job it's there to do. But I think across industry, there has been some quite good engagement around the funding model, and obviously we are very happy to pass on views into oversight committee, and I know that they're getting ready to look at how best to engage with industry on this one.
Good. I mean, I think it's hard to please all the people all the time, but I think you've got to try, and that's part of this one. What about the other thing I've been hearing, which is people concerned that the new entity has the chance can choose what it competes on and what it doesn't. So what services can it offer? where you could end up competing with people within the industry. It could end up competing with TPPs or directory providers or ASPs. So what's your view on the competitive challenge?
And that's and that's the joys I get to kick those over to JROC, because I think that is important, that we obviously, for us OBIE, I like to think, especially the trustee role, you have to be very neutral. You have to consider everyone's views, and when there's not a clear outline of which way you go, and we've had this quite recently on the sweeping definition, we then engage back with the regulators and say, look, we're there to give the position of people who come to us. And if we don't know the answer, or we don't think a particular way is the right way or wrong way, then it is really important that we do engage with the regulators of looking at that. As we know, when you're setting up any new entity, there's lots of different corporate structures that can be put in place. You can have commercial arms, you can have obviously non-profit, you can have something sitting there as a monitoring function. It's and I think that's the benefit of it. And I definitely encourage people to either write into JROC directly or into FCA PSR, but also if it's just general views, we are happy also from an industry perspective to capture those if helpful, and make sure that they are amplified if it's something we're hearing very loud and clear across that. I think what we've got to be careful of, there's not a lot of time. We have got to focus on the bigger picture. So people know this across the industry. What I've said is it's incredibly helpful if people come together on those and actually say, this is what we need to do. This is the data. This is the evidence of why that's not working or what this needs to change to. Because if we bombard every single person, regulator, with 200 different voices, we're not going to get to transition by the end of the year.
That makes good sense. So there's a pragmatism there, and I think that's sound. Also, I think the new entity needs to define these things, and it won't want to do everything because it won't want to compete with its channel. So let's move on to the small thing that's just come up just this week was somebody mentioning that some banks are actually imposing a limit on the amount that new payees can send bank to bank via open banking. I thought that was a bit odd.
So I've heard this. I've heard loud and clear. I think many people have across the industry. And again, this comes back to my limitations as trustee. Am I able to look at that or not? What I can do, obviously, is I can ensure that we do pass those on. And if I'm not sure if it's really within the trustee duties now, I will push this over to CMA or to FCA PSR. And in particular cases, I have made sure that those do get passed on. And again, what I've said to anyone who's facing issues like this, if it's a one-off issue for them, we can raise it. If it's an issue for across the whole industry, you go and tell us that. Tell us what's on the burning list, and then we'll make sure that it gets the right attention of the right people.
Brilliant. That's a very, I'd say, very enlightened and open attitude, and I think the right one. Do you have a kind of a comment for the industry? Do you have any message for the industry, in particular, the 180 or so members of the Payment Association, as things continue to evolve? And what would you seek from us and our members?
I think is that it does come back to that coordination and representation. Anyone who comes to me and says, I get lots of text messages, lots of WhatsApp messages. I said, look, I'm chair and trustee. We have to put this through the right channels, and we do need to have the evidence and the data. But this is something that obviously is hampering the success of open banking or hampering the growth of open banking. And the problem, as we know, across the whole of the fintech space, the TPPs and the users, is that there's so many different business models out there, and there's going to be a very, very long wish list there. So I think this is where industry bodies play a really key role in coordinating those voices and giving us those top priority list that they think that it is, as I said, fundamentally it's hampering the competition that can come into retail banking. And I think that's important. It's even more important when you start to open up the scope of what a future entity might look at beyond open banking, because as we know, there's lots of different things that could be looked at first. So let's really make sure that this is something that is real priority for across the whole industry. It is an issue, and we'll obviously, if it is something that we think does fall under the trustee role, we obviously will look at it. If it's beyond what was technically in the order, then we will make sure we raise that with FCA and PSR, who both know that they're going to get a list from me in the not so distant future.
Very good, very good, and that I think is a very positive message to give to our Project Open Banking team, run by the guys at Tink and my end by Tom Bruin, and we'll make sure that we provide a channel and communicate those things in a coordinated way, so you don't get text messages at midnight saying, "What about this?"
It's no, and and the thing is that part of you obviously always wants to go back, especially when you've come from an industry body yourself. You obviously want to you want to make sure everyone has that voice there. And we do have to, as I said, we have to consider it and say, is this really an issue there? And as I said, is it affecting the success of open banking? And I think that's what I always come back to. But I wouldn't promise people we do raise these. If we think it's beyond our scope, they are going into a shortlist where, as I said, it's across the whole industry, and then the longer list. And that's really important that we don't lose sight of that list of what's done, because there's people who've been raising these issues now for a couple of years and have been wanting it to go beyond the scope of the original order. We are passing that on, and that will be considered during the transition. It isn't just going to wait for future entity, because we can't wait in some of these cases.
No, absolutely.
And we'll be pushing CMA 9 and CMA for responses before we even get to what comes next.
Very good, thank you. So, and finally, a few personal views. We've done all the deep dive stuff on open banking, and thank you for answering those questions. Personal views. You'll be pleased to hear I was going to ask about post-Brexit and thing, but I'm actually not. I've decided Brexit is so yesterday. I'm going to talk about I saw a lovely picture online of you and your daughter at Windsor, your daughter Honor at Windsor, and when you were receiving your OBE recently, and I thought to myself, it's a challenging future for current generations. Do you have a message? You've been through your extraordinary, varied but accomplished career, and what messages do you have for the men and women of her generation, both in terms of how they see our industry, fintech and payments, but also how they use financial services?
Yeah, and people will know that I've done a fair amount of trying to inspire children at school. I would love to see financial education at school as part of the curriculum. I think it's so important. It's done in other countries. Too many children are coming out of school with not a clue how to manage their finances, or being influenced by people on TikTok, on Snap, on Instagram, of telling them where they should be putting their money. And you've even got lots of teenagers dabbling in NFTs and crypto. So we just have to be careful, because the pace of change is so fast, and the education won't come from a high street bank anymore. This won't be, and I think we remember those times at 16 years old where you went down and you met the bank manager. Strange phenomenon for those young people out there listening to this. You went to meet your bank manager and you opened your account face to face, and then you called up that manager and said, "Can you help me with my £20, piggy bank?" That doesn't happen anymore. So the beauty is it's democratizing finance, because everyone has the same access, and a huge amount of people across the country do have a smartphone and know how to operate a smartphone pretty well. But we've got to make sure that, as I said, that we are educating people, that they understand what this means. And yes, it's great to make payments as easy as it is now, but let's make sure that people understand what the impact is on their own savings as well. So in the race for digitization and transformation, I want us all to make sure that we are taking that time to say, well, what does this mean? And ease and speed is great, but let's make sure that we are protecting the people who don't realize the impact of that. I think it's fantastic that we don't have payday lenders anymore, and what that got people into debt was quite sad.
We do have buy now, pay later, a whole wave, and 30% of all purchases are now made on BNPL, and essentially that's credit. And the extent to which people understand it's credit and they're actually going into debt is very thin. A very small number of people see it that way. So I think,
so we've just got to we've got to really make sure, as I said, we've got to harness that. And then I think coming back to getting those people into careers in this, and recognizing actually the value of the perception of a 16 to 18 to 21-year-old, think of the exits from education, is incredibly important now. So I always say to anyone, when you're looking at diversity, don't just think of gender, don't even just think about ethnic diversity, don't even think of just socioeconomic diversity, but think of your age diversity, because the mindset of those people who only know how to operate financial services in a digital world is incredibly important, because it's going to be actually the consumer and the small business that will drive forward innovation in financial services. It won't be the fintech or the bank. It's going to be those who recognize what a consumer needs
Yes.
And as I said, and then work with them to work that through. And I'm really encouraged across the fintech industry that obviously our first wave of founders came very much from banking. You could see the age, was definitely they've been successful careers.
Yes.
Now what you're seeing is those younger founders who've come through school and university saying, I can make that better. And I can sit there and relate to those young people who will be my bigger customers in the future. So I really hope that especially to young girls who don't think finance and tech is very exciting, is the purpose of what open banking and open finance and fintech is doing. It's incredibly important. And so anyone who thinks that this isn't a really crucial role, think again. Look me up. We can persuade anyone to come to fintech. We do need a more diverse list of fintech founders, and we need more investors to invest into those diverse companies as well.
Yeah.
But incredibly important mission to take forward.
So, top tip to a graduate who's just completed their degree in landscape gardening or in some human studies or something. What's your top tip to a graduate just coming out of who's thinking about following in your footsteps?
Top tip: go and take a year off because you've got the rest of your life to work. Make sure you plan in sabbaticals because that's what you will have the opportunity to do now, which we never dare take a year off, obviously, with career. But also recognise that you can change careers. It doesn't matter what background you have. You don't have to have a maths or computer science degree to come into fintech. I see people. I got a 2-2 in French. Who would have thought in French? I was very good at French, but I wasn't a very good student. So that's why I ended up with 2-2. But Goldman did need someone who spoke French for a day. So that's how I got to the city. It doesn't matter because you're going to go through, I think the estimate now is 11 different career changes, not just job changes, career changes.
Yeah.
So go and do landscape gardening, but go and do some coding in the evening. Go and, go and do, as I said, go and travel the world, but think, how do I start a business here? Every day I think about a fintech that I would start if I had the time to do it. And as I said to someone last night, somebody had said to me recently, you've got to decide, is it one day or is it day one? And I think that's a great mantra to remember.
Wonderful, and a wonderful concluding comment. Thank you very much indeed. So, on behalf of the whole of the Payments Association community, Charlotte Crosswell, OBE Chair and Trustee of the OBIE, thank you very much indeed for sharing your insights today.
Thank you, Tony.